My homage to the gem of the Supreme Buddha. The Buddha is my refuge every day. My homage to the gem of the Supreme Dhamma. The Dhamma is my refuge every day. My homage to the gem of the Supreme Sangha. The Sangha is my refuge every day. My homage to the Supreme Triple Gem. The Triple Gem is my refuge every day. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo Buddhaya. Meritorious devotees, our great teacher, Supreme Buddha, is the most intelligent, the smartest, the wisest teacher in this world. Supreme Buddha knows exactly how we should investigate and explore the true nature of this life in order to escape from suffering. That's a very significant thing. Now when we think about investigation and exploration, people can do that investigation about many things in many ways. We can call such investigations ignoble investigations or ordinary investigations. Why? Because those investigations don't lead to the cessation and end of suffering. They can use their intelligence and their techniques to investigate about many things, but eventually they would end up with an ordinary discovery. Their discovery would not lead to end the suffering. Still, they would be entangled in this cycle of birth and death. That is the nature of an ignoble exploration. Today we are going to learn a very important discourse preached by our great teacher, the Blessed One. This sutta is found in Samyutta Nikaya. In this discourse, we are going to learn how our great teacher Supreme Buddha taught the disciples the way to do that investigation, especially leading to the end of suffering. Meritorious disciples, we have got this very rare opportunity to do that investigation leading to true happiness. So we have done many investigations in our previous lives about ordinary things, but we were not able to escape from suffering. That's why this opportunity is very significant and important. So, on one occasion, our great teacher, the Blessed One, was dwelling among the Kurus, where there was a town of the Kurus named Kammasadhamma. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, the monks were ready to learn the teachings of the Supreme Buddha, and they were paying their close attention with eager ears to understand excellent teaching. The Blessed One taught the Dhamma, asking a question. Bhikkhus, do you engage in inward exploration? The Blessed One asked a very important question. What did the Blessed One ask? Blessed One asked the bhikkhus, do you investigate the true nature of this life? It is always called inward exploration. You don't think about the other planets and other external things. This is very important. In order to stop this cycle of birth and death, in order to escape from this suffering, one should investigate the true nature of this life. That's why it's called inward exploration. When this was said, one bhikkhu said to the Blessed One, Bhante, I engage in inward exploration. Supreme Buddha asked, how do you engage in inward exploration, bhikkhu? The bhikkhu then explained how he does that exploration, how he engages in that inward exploration, but the way he explained did not satisfy the Blessed One. Then the Venerable Ananda Bhante was sitting there, and the Ananda Bhante got the opportunity to invite the Supreme Buddha, saying, Bhante, now is the time for this. Now is the time for the Blessed One. Now is the time for the Fortunate One. For this, let the Blessed One explain inward exploration. Having heard it from the Blessed One, the bhikkhus will remember it. Ananda Bhante invited the Supreme Buddha to preach about this investigation, to preach about this inward exploration. So, always this Dhamma is comprehended by the wise. So, wisdom is that key factor that one should possess of. As a result of our previous merit, one is born with that special faculty called wisdom. But as long as the teaching of the Supreme Buddha is heard, and as long as an effort is made, one does not understand that one has that wisdom. So when we study the teachings of the Supreme Buddha, we should use our wise consideration in order to give rise to that wisdom. Supreme Buddha then wanted to explain that exploration, inward exploration, to the bhikkhus. Here, bhikkhus, when engaged in inward exploration, a bhikkhu explores thus: the many diverse kinds of suffering that arise in the world headed by aging and death. So this is the starting point of his exploration. This is the field of wise people. Wise people means who want to see the things as they really are. When such people open their eyes of wisdom, when they look into their lives, to the depths of their lives, what can they see? They can see this inherent suffering of the lives of beings. The whole mass of suffering headed by aging and death. This is the first step of that investigation. Wise people can see that in this world one is experienced very little gratification. But the suffering is greater. This is the discovery of wise people. The other thing is that wise people don't want to suffer like this again and again. They want to stop this cycle that generates suffering. So Supreme Buddha explains about the investigation of a wise person. So when a wise person starts off this exploration, how does he understand? How does he investigate the many diverse kinds of suffering that arise in the world headed by aging and death? What is the source of this suffering? This is the first step of that path which leads to the end of suffering. When he understands this inherent suffering of the lives of all beings, then he wants to stop this. He wants to escape from this suffering. He wants to find the way out. As a result of that eagerness to escape from suffering, he questions with wisdom to know what is the source of this suffering. What is its origin? From what is it born and produced? Now, here in this investigation, there is a very important procedure. Since he is a noble disciple, the one who does this exploration is a noble disciple, not an ordinary person. A noble disciple has a fundamental and initial knowledge about this Dhamma. When he possesses that initial knowledge, he knows that any investigation in terms of the teaching of the Supreme Buddha should be done with the mechanism of cause and effect system, not based on a self or a permanent entity. Everything depends on causes and conditions. That means when he understands this suffering headed by aging and death of beings, he does not question who punishes beings, who inflicts this suffering on beings. He does not think about a creator God or an external influence with regard to this suffering. Instead, he questions what is the source of this suffering, what is its origin, from what is it born and produced. See, that is how the great wisdom of the Supreme Buddha has helped him in the first place, to do this investigation and exploration based on causes and effects. That is the key entrance of this investigation done by a wise disciple. He questions, when what exists, does aging and death come to be? When what does not exist, does aging and death not come to be? That means he knows very clearly, if there is a cause for aging and death, when the cause is ceased, the aging and death also should be ceased. As he explores, he understands thus. The Supreme Buddha explains, he understands the many diverse kinds of suffering that arise in the world headed by aging and death. This suffering has acquisition as its source. Upadhinidana. What is the source? Acquisition. Acquisition as its origin. It is born and produced from acquisition. When there is acquisition, aging and death comes to be. When there is no acquisition, aging and death does not come to be. This is how the disciples of the Supreme Buddha should learn the knowledge of the Supreme Buddha. First, they should learn what Supreme Buddha has discovered, and then they should try to apply that investigation into their own lives. Then they also will be able to understand how true the Blessed One's investigation is. Now, Supreme Buddha explains, when the disciples do this investigation, they understand that the source of aging and death, origin of aging and death, is acquisition. Now, in the teachings of the Supreme Buddha, Supreme Buddha explains very clearly the reason for this process of rebirth. When beings do actions based on tames, asava, clinging, upadana, craving, tanha, ignorance, avidya, when beings do actions based on these root defilements, beings continue this cycle of rebirth. So these actions that are done based on taints and clinging and other defilements leading to rebirth are called acquisitions. Now Supreme Buddha explains, when beings do actions based on these defilements which will give rise to rebirth, beings are reborn. When beings are reborn in this world, in this cycle, for sure they are subject to aging, sickness, mental suffering, physical suffering, pain, grief, sorrow, lamentation, and death. That's why here Supreme Buddha explains, with the help of the teachings of the Supreme Buddha, when a noble disciple explores and investigates the true nature of this life, aging and death is born and produced from acquisition. When there are these defilements, and when these actions are done based on those defilements, aging and death comes to be. But when there are no these actions that are done based on defilements, aging and death does not come to be. He understands aging and death, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading on that is on conformity with its cessation. He practices in that way and conducts himself accordingly. Now Supreme Buddha explains, when a noble disciple understands very clearly the source, the origin of aging and death as the acquisition, he practices this Dhamma in order to abandon unwholesome qualities and to cultivate wholesome qualities. This is called a bhikkhu who is practicing for the utterly complete destruction of suffering, for the cessation of aging and death. And his practice helps him to weaken fetters, clinging, craving, and other defilements, and eventually they will be uprooted and escape from all mass of suffering. Supreme Buddha explains, as a result of this investigation, a noble disciple tends to follow the path. That's where he lands. When he does this investigation, he does not end up with doubts and perplexities. Instead, he falls into the path leading to the cessation of suffering. That is very important. Now, meritorious duties. Supreme Buddha explains how this exploration should be done further. Then, engaging further in inward exploration, he explores thus: what is the source of this acquisition? What is its origin? From what is it born and produced? When what exists, does acquisition come to be? When what is absent, does acquisition not come to be? Now he realized that aging and death are conditioned. It has a cause, and it is not without a cause and source. The acquisition is its source. That means aging and death are conditioned. And now he questions further, now he explores further, then acquisition is also should be conditioned. Certainly it is conditioned. Then there should be a source for this acquisition. He investigates how these actions are generated based on taints, clinging, and craving, and other defilements. When he explores further, he understands acquisition has craving as its source, craving as its origin. It is born and produced from craving. When there is craving, acquisition comes to be. When there is no craving, acquisition does not come to be. He understands the true nature of this life gradually, little by little, with the help of the extraordinary knowledge of the Supreme Buddha. So he understood the source of acquisition is craving. Based on craving, those actions are done. When those defiled actions are done, beings are reborn. When beings are reborn, beings are subject to aging and death. And this continues again and again, endlessly. So the disciple understands craving as a main root of this process of suffering. Supreme Buddha explains, when the noble disciple understands thus, acquisition, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading on, that is in conformity with its cessation, he practices in that way and conducts himself accordingly. Now he practices the teachings of the Supreme Buddha to eliminate this cause, craving. This is called a bhikkhu who is practicing for the utterly complete destruction of suffering, for the cessation of acquisition. In order to achieve the cessation of acquisition, what should be done? The way should be followed to achieve the cessation of craving. When the cessation of craving is achieved, the cessation of acquisition is also achieved. That is how these causes and conditions lead to the cessation of effects. Supreme Buddha explains further about this wise exploration, inward exploration. Then, engaging further in inward exploration, he explores thus: when this craving arises, where does it arise? Now he discovered a very significant key factor of this arrangement of suffering, that is craving. Now he wants to discover everything about this craving, because he is on the way to uproot that craving. Now think about this. Now we tend to think that craving is our friend. Craving makes us happy. We need craving. Without craving, how could we enjoy this life? That's how our ignorant mind thinks about this delusion. But here, as a wise, noble disciple, when the disciples of the Supreme Buddha explore this life, this is how that noble disciple investigates. When this craving arises, where does it arise? Now he wants to give up this craving. He wants to uproot this craving. He knows very clearly craving is no longer his friend. Craving is like an enemy. When it settles down, upon what does it settle? As he explores, he understands thus: whatever in the world has a pleasant and agreeable nature, yang ruke piya rupang sata rupang, Ettesa tanha uppajjamana uppajjati. It is here that this craving arises when it arises. Etta nivisamana nivisati. It is here that it settles when it settles down. Where whatever in the world has a pleasant and agreeable nature. Now, how does he find out these answers? It is because of the discovery of the Supreme Buddha. Otherwise, these discoveries are very subtle. So he understands about the hidden areas where this craving settles down. And what in the world has a pleasant and agreeable nature? Chakkung loke piyarupang satarupang. He understands the eye has a pleasant and agreeable nature in the world. It is here that this craving arises when it arises. It is here that it settles when it settles down. So where is this craving hiding? It is within our own life. It settles down in our own faculties. We call them our faculties. My eye, my ear. But here, instead of getting that notion of myself, mine and I am, the noble disciple investigates as faculties that generate suffering, that give rise to acquisition. Because when craving arises in these faculties, it becomes the source of acquisition. And the acquisition becomes the source of aging and death. So these are not friendly places anymore, even though we think so. They are called faculties that generate suffering. Now here he understands the nose, the ear, has a pleasant and agreeable nature in the world. The nose has a pleasant and agreeable nature in the world. The tongue has a pleasant and agreeable nature in the world. The body has a pleasant and agreeable nature in the world. And the mind has a pleasant and agreeable nature in the world. It is here that this craving arises when it arises. It is here that it settles when it settles down in our own life, in these 6 faculties. Now he came to a point where he understood how this main cause of suffering functions and where this main cause of suffering is hidden. That means we are using a life that generates suffering for ourselves. These 6 faculties do not help us to escape from this suffering. Instead, they generate causes for suffering. We have to understand that very clearly with this investigation. Bhikkhus, the Supreme Buddha explains further, Whatever ascetics and Brahmins in the past regarded that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as permanent. That means I as permanent, because they are the agreeable and pleasant things. They are the things with a pleasant and agreeable nature in the world. Whatever people in the past regarded that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as permanent, as happiness, as self, as healthy, as secure, they nurtured craving. Those who regarded these 6 faculties as pleasant and agreeable in the past, what did they nurture? They nurtured craving. In nurturing craving, they nurtured acquisition. In nurturing acquisition, they nurtured suffering. In nurturing suffering, they were not freed from birth, aging, and death. They were not freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. They were not freed from suffering, I say. See, Supreme Buddha realized very clearly how people suffered in the past, how they were born in bad worlds, how they were born in hell, animal world, and ghost world, how they continued their journey of samsara, which is full of suffering. It happened in this way. Supreme Buddha explains further, whatever ascetics and Brahmins in the future will regard that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature, that means eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind, these things as permanent, as happiness, as self, as healthy, as secure, they will nurture craving. Isn't this about our future? In nurturing craving, they will nurture acquisition. In nurturing acquisition, they will nurture suffering. In nurturing suffering, they will not freed from birth, aging, and death. They will not be freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. They will not be freed from suffering, I say. Isn't this very dangerous? This journey, endless journey. And again, Supreme Buddha explains about our present life, what we are doing here. Whatever ascetics and Brahmins at present regard that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as permanent, as happiness, as self, as healthy, as secure. That means when people think about this life, this is my life, I am very healthy, I have a lot of plans, future plans, I know that my life is very secure, I am going to experience very happy things. Don't people think in that way? They do. When they regard this life as permanent, as happiness, as self, as healthy, as secure in that way, Supreme Buddha explains they are nurturing craving. They hold such attitudes in order to gratify their lives based on craving. When they think that this life is permanent, happy, and there is a self here, people can keep their craving. In nurturing craving, they are nurturing acquisition. In nurturing acquisition, they are nurturing suffering. In nurturing suffering, they are not freed from birth, aging and death. They are not freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain and despair. And they are not freed from suffering, I say. Now, it is very obvious that all of us are experiencing various kinds of suffering. This is the reason. What is the reason? Because we regard these beautiful things, pleasant things, agreeable things as mine, as secure. We think that we can build our hopes based on these beautiful things in the world. And what do we generate? We nurture craving. As a result of nurturing craving, having clung to things, we give rise to karma, defiled karma, acquisition. As a result of that, we are still in the process of rebirth. Now, meritorious disciples, Supreme Buddha explains about this tragedy that has happened to us, giving a simile, and how people entangled in this suffering in the past, and how people are going to fall into this suffering in the future. Supreme Buddha is going to explain about this incident with a simile. Suppose, bhikkhus, there was a bronze cup of beverage having a fine color, aroma and taste, but it was mixed with poison. Even though it has a fine color, smell and taste, it was mixed with poison. Then a man would come along, oppressed and afflicted by the heat, tired, parched and thirsty, a weak person. They would tell him, "Good man, this beverage in a bronze cup has a fine color, aroma and taste, but it is mixed with poison. Drink it if you wish. If you drink it, it will gratify you with its color, smell and taste. But by drinking it, you will meet death or deadly suffering." Can you guess what he would do? Because he was overcome with that heat and thirst. He would not, and Supreme Buddha explains, suddenly without reflecting, he would drink the beverage. He would not reject it, and thereby he would meet death or deadly suffering. How unfortunate this incident is. Supreme Buddha explains, so too bhikkhus, whatever ascetics and Brahmins in the past regarded that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as permanent, as happiness, as self, as healthy, as secure, they nurtured craving. And as a result of nurturing craving, they nurtured acquisition. Nurturing acquisition, they nurtured suffering. As a result of generating these causes for suffering, they did not escape from suffering. They were not freed from aging, death sorrow, pain, and lamentation. The causes and conditions led them to suffer. In the same way, Supreme Buddha explains, so too whatever people who regard these beautiful things, pleasant things, agreeable things in the world, the people who are going to be in the future, if they are going to regard these pleasant, agreeable and beautiful things as permanent, pleasant, healthy, secure and happy things, they are also going to nurture craving. Nurturing craving, they will nurture acquisition. Nurturing acquisition, they will nurture suffering. They also will continue their journey of suffering. Again, what is the cause? It is because they are arranging of causes and conditions leading to suffering. And using the same simile, Supreme Buddha explains, whatever people who are in the present regard these agreeable and pleasant things as happy, healthy and secure things, they are nurturing craving. Nurturing craving, they are nurturing acquisition. Nurturing acquisition, they are nurturing suffering. That's why they also can't escape from this suffering. They are not freed from aging and death. But fortunately, Supreme Buddha discovered the way out. Supreme Buddha realized that this process of suffering is conditioned. When the causes are ceased, conditions are ceased, effects are also ceased. That's a universal law in this world. Supreme Buddha realized that. This is how Supreme Buddha explained about the way out. Because whatever ascetics and Brahmins in the past regarded that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as impermanent, not as permanent, as impermanent, as suffering, not as happiness, as suffering, as non-self, not as self, as non-self, as a disease, not as healthy, as a disease, as fearful, not as secure. Those who regarded these pleasant and agreeable things as impermanent, as suffering, as non-self, as a disease, as fearful, they abandoned craving. See, now this is very important. Now this noble disciple understood how craving functions as a key factor of this arranging of suffering. Now he comes to a point where he could understand how this craving is eliminated. The way that should be followed to abandon this craving. What is that way? Yes, he should understand, even though there are very agreeable and pleasant things in this world, even though they exist. Now, do you remember those pleasant and agreeable things that exist in this world? It is this eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. How does he regard about these things? Or how did those people who were in the past, the wise people, regard? these 6 faculties. They regarded them as impermanent, suffering, non-self, as a disease, and as fearful. As a result of that wise consideration, what happened? They abandoned craving. In abandoning craving, they abandoned acquisition. In abandoning acquisition, they abandoned suffering. In abandoning suffering, they were freed from birth, aging, and death. They were freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. They were freed from suffering, I say. They were very fortunate. Who are they? Those great arahants. With the help of the teachings of the Supreme Buddha, they did this investigation about this life. They followed the way leading to the cessation of suffering. They regarded these faculties as impermanent, suffering, non-self. That is how they escaped from suffering. Supreme Buddha explains further, whatever ascetics and Brahmins in the future will regard that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as impermanent, as suffering, as non-self, as a disease, as fearful, they will abandon craving. Now this is the thing, this is the procedure that we should follow, that we should apply into our own lives. This is the way out, because Supreme Buddha explains about the people in future, who are going to be in the future. That means this explanation is about our lives. Supreme Buddha saw our lives. If we can do this contemplation about these 6 faculties in a way that we can understand the true nature of them, if we can contemplate them as impermanent, suffering, non-self, as a disease, and as fearful, we will abandon craving one day. In abandoning craving, those people in the future will abandon acquisition. In abandoning acquisition, they will abandon suffering. They will be freed from suffering, aging, and death, sorrow, pain, lamentation, and despair. Now, meritorious disciples, we also want to achieve this cessation of suffering, end of suffering. We also want to escape from this cycle of birth and death. And this is the way to do that. Supreme Buddha explains, whatever ascetics and Brahmins at present regard that in the world with a pleasant and agreeable nature as impermanent, as suffering, as non-self, as a disease, as fearful, they are abandoning craving. In abandoning craving, they are abandoning acquisition. In abandoning acquisition, they are abandoning suffering. They are going to be freed from aging and death. And Supreme Buddha explains about these fortunate people, giving a very beautiful simile. Suppose, bhikkhus, there was a bronze cup of a beverage having a fine color, aroma, and taste, but it was mixed with poison. Still the same cup, mixed with poison. Then a man would come along, oppressed and afflicted by the heat, tired, parched, and thirsty. They would tell him, good man, this beverage is in bronze cup has a fine color, aroma, and taste, but it is mixed with poison. Drink it if you wish. If you drink it, it will gratify you with its color, aroma, and taste, but by drinking it, you will meet death or deadly suffering. Then that wise man would think, I can quench my thirst with water, porridge, or soup. but I should not drink that beverage, since to do so would lead to my harm and suffering for a long time. Having reflected, he would not drink the beverage but would reject it, and thereby he would not meet death or deadly suffering. See, this is a very good lesson for our lives. Even though these 6 faculties seem to be very agreeable and pleasant, still we should not misunderstand that the beverage is mixed with poison. So, without paying attention to that gratification of these 6 faculties, we should try to contemplate them as impermanent, suffering, non-self, as a disease, as fearful. When the disciples regard these faculties, the true nature, and most importantly, this is the true nature of these faculties. He doesn't do something artificial. He develops his wisdom to a point where he could understand the true nature of these faculties, the reality. As a result of understanding the reality, the true nature of these pleasant things, agreeable things, this wise noble disciple abandons craving. By abandoning craving, he abandons acquisition, because they are interconnected. Everything depends on causes and conditions. When the cause is ceased, the effect is also ceased. Abandoning acquisition, he abandons suffering. Abandoning suffering means he is freed from aging, sorrow, pain, lamentation, grief, despair, and death. So, meritorious disciples, in this sutta, Supreme Buddha explains very important things. How suffering arises, how this sansaric journey is formed, generated endlessly, what those causes and conditions are, and the most compassionate teachers, the Supreme Buddha, explained the way out. We can use our own mindfulness, our own wisdom to contemplate the true nature of these 6 faculties. Even though they provide a little gratification, we should not forget that they lead to a great suffering. Like that beverage that is mixed with poison, we should reject that gratification. We should reject our emotions and feelings to gratify our lives with that little gratification. Instead, we should work very hard to satisfy with water, just drinking water. It's like without going to gratify our lives with these pleasant, agreeable things in the world, we are trying to contemplate the true nature of these beautiful things with a very important intention and purpose, that is to be free from this great suffering. So, meritorious disciples, we are very fortunate to learn about this way leading to the end of suffering. So, without missing this opportunity, without being negligent, let's work hard. May all of us have the opportunity to understand and to contemplate, to investigate the true nature of these 6 faculties. And may all of us achieve the end of suffering using that contemplation in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo Buddhaya.